Rebecca Winters pressed her back against the schoolhouse door as the crowd surged forward, their torches casting dancing shadows across angry faces. She had known this moment would come eventually, but understanding it in theory and living it in practice were two entirely different things. It was October 1873, and Muskogee, Oklahoma had finally decided she had pushed them too far. "You're corrupting our daughters," Mayor Hutchins bellowed, his jowls shaking with rage. "Teaching them to question their husbands, to think they're as good as men. It's unnatural." Rebecca lifted her chin, refusing to show the fear coursing through her veins. She was 24 years old, unmarried, and educated back east at one of the few colleges that accepted women. When she had arrived in Muskogee 6 months ago, the town had been desperate enough for a teacher that they overlooked her gender and her progressive ideas. But desperation only lasted so long. "I teach them mathematics, literature, and critical thinking," Rebecca called back, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "The same subjects boys learn." "That's exactly the problem," Mrs. Henderson shrieked from the crowd. "My Sarah came home yesterday asking why women cannot vote, asking why she cannot inherit property like her brothers. You put those ideas in her head." "I taught her history," Rebecca corrected. She drew her own conclusions. The crowd roared its disapproval. Rebecca saw several of her students in the gathering, their faces torn between loyalty to their families and the woman who had opened their minds to possibilities beyond cooking and sewing. Young Sarah Henderson was crying openly, while 15-year-old Margaret Preston looked defiant, her arms crossed as she glared at her own father. "You have until dawn to leave Muskogee," Mayor Hutchins declared. "If you're still here when the sun comes up, we cannot guarantee your safety." Rebecca wanted to argue, wanted to stand her ground, but she was not foolish. The violence in their eyes was real. She had no family here, no protector, no one who would risk the town's wrath to defend her. She was alone. "I'll go," she said quietly, and the words tasted like ash in her mouth. The crowd dispersed slowly, muttering and grumbling. Rebecca waited until they were gone before she allowed herself to sink down against the door, her legs finally giving way. She had poured everything into this school, into these girls. She had watched them blossom, seen their eyes light up as they grasped concepts beyond needlework and recipes. And now it was ending because small minds feared educated women. She did not sleep that night. Instead, she packed her few belongings into a worn leather satchel and gathered her precious books into a wooden crate. By the time the first pink rays of dawn stretched across the Oklahoma sky, Rebecca was hitching her horse to the small wagon she had purchased with her teacher's salary. The mare, a gentle gray named Pearl, nickered softly as Rebecca checked the harness one final time. "Just you and me now, girl," Rebecca murmured, stroking the horse's nose. She drove the wagon down the empty main street, past the general store and the saloon, past the houses where her students slept. As she reached the edge of town, she saw a small figure standing by the road. Margaret Preston stepped forward, her young face determined. "Miss Winters," Margaret said urgently, "I wanted to say goodbye properly, and to thank you." Rebecca pulled the wagon to a stop, her eyes stinging. "Margaret, you should not be out here alone. Your father will be furious." "I do not care," Margaret said fiercely. "What you taught us matters. I will not forget. None of us will." "Keep reading," Rebecca told her, gripping the girl's hand tightly. "Keep thinking. Do not let them make you small." Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Then she pressed a small cloth bundle into Rebecca's hands. Some bread and cheese for your journey." Rebecca wanted to refuse, knowing the Preston family had little to spare, but she recognized the gift for what it was and accepted it with gratitude. "Thank you, Margaret. Be brave." The girl stepped back, and Rebecca urged Pearl forward. She did not look back at Muskogee. There was nothing there for her anymore. For 3 days, Rebecca traveled north and west, following barely marked trails through Oklahoma Territory. She had no destination in mind, just the vague idea of finding another town that might need a teacher. But word traveled fast in the frontier, and she suspected her reputation would precede her. The October weather was unpredictable. Cool mornings gave way to warm afternoons, and the nights grew increasingly cold. Rebecca was not an experienced outdoors woman. She had grown up in Boston, where the wilderness meant a well-manicured park. Out here, the land stretched endlessly, and she felt insignificant against the vast sky. On the 4th day, her supplies ran low. She had passed no settlements, seen no other travelers. The landscape grew more rugged, with rocky outcroppings and dense stands of trees. Rebecca began to worry that she had taken a wrong turn somewhere, that she was hopelessly lost. That afternoon, Pearl threw a shoe. Rebecca pulled the wagon to a stop and examined the mare's hoof with growing concern. She had no idea how to fix this problem, and continuing to travel would risk injuring the horse. She was standing there, feeling helpless and fighting back tears of frustration, when she heard the sound of an approaching rider. Rebecca's hand instinctively went to the small pistol she carried in her pocket. A gift from her late father, who had insisted every woman traveling west should have protection, even if he had never imagined his educated daughter would actually need it. The rider who emerged from the tree line was unlike any man Rebecca had ever seen. He sat astride a massive bay stallion, his powerful frame making the large horse seem almost ordinary-sized. He wore buckskin pants and a rough wool shirt that strained across impossibly broad shoulders. His dark hair hung past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord, and several days' worth of beard shadowed a strong jaw. He looked wild and dangerous, and Rebecca's heart hammered in her chest. But then she saw his eyes. They were a striking blue-gray, calm and assessing, and when he looked at her frightened face, something in his expression softened. "You all right, miss?" His voice was deep and rough, like he did not use it often. "My horse," Rebecca managed, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "She lost a shoe." The man dismounted in one fluid motion, moving with a grace that seemed impossible for someone his size. Up close, he was even more imposing. He had to be well over 6 feet tall, with arms thick with muscle, and hands that looked like they could break a man in half. Yet when he approached Pearl, his movements were gentle and careful. "Easy, girl," he murmured, running his hand down the mare's neck before examining her hoof. "This will not be hard to fix." He straightened and met Rebecca's eyes. "I'm Preston Wolfe. Got a place about 5 miles north of here. I can fix her up there if you're willing to come." Rebecca hesitated. Every instinct screamed that she should not go anywhere with this strange mountain man. But what choice did she have? She was alone, lost, and her horse needed care. "I'm Rebecca Winters," she said finally. "And yes, I would be very grateful for your help." Preston nodded and swung back onto his stallion. "Follow me. We will take it slow for your mare's sake." They traveled through increasingly dense forest, following what looked to Rebecca like no path at all. But Preston moved with absolute certainty, and eventually they emerged into a clearing that took her breath away. A sturdy log cabin sat near a clear stream, smoke rising from its stone chimney. Behind it, She could see a small barn and a corral with several horses. The clearing was surrounded by towering pines and oaks, their autumn leaves painting the landscape in golds and reds. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow. "It's beautiful," Rebecca breathed. Preston glanced back at her, surprise flickering across his rugged features. "Thank you. Built it myself 3 years back." He helped her unhitch Pearl and led the mare into the barn. Rebecca followed, watching as he moved with practiced efficiency, gathering tools and materials. His hands, so large and scarred, worked with surprising delicacy as he fitted a new shoe to Pearl's hoof. "You are very skilled," Rebecca observed. "Had to learn. Out here, you cannot rely on anyone else." He glanced up at her. "What brings you out this way alone? Not many women traveling by themselves through this country." Rebecca felt her throat tighten. "I was teaching in Muskogee. The town decided they did not approve of my methods." "What methods were those?" "I taught girls the same subjects as boys, encouraged them to think critically, to question. Apparently, that was too radical." Preston finished with Pearl's hoof and stood, wiping his hands on his pants. His eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "Seems like a reasonable thing to teach to me." Rebecca blinked. "You think so?" "Why would not it be? Thinking is not just for men." He led Pearl to a stall with fresh hay and water. "You have anywhere to go?" "No," Rebecca admitted. "I was hoping to find another town that might need a teacher. But I am beginning to think that was foolish." Preston was quiet for a long moment, When he spoke, his voice was careful. "I got about 300 acres here. Good land, plenty of water. Been thinking it might be nice to see it used for something more than just my horses and trapping." Rebecca's heart began to beat faster. "What are you saying?" "Saying you could stay. Build a schoolhouse if you wanted. Teach whoever wants to learn." He met her eyes directly. "Nobody would run you off my land. I give you my word on that." Rebecca stared at him, certain she must have misheard. "You do not even know me." "Know enough. You are educated, brave enough to stand up for what you believe in, and you treated your horse kind even when you were scared and frustrated. That tells me what I need to know." "But why would you do this?" Preston's expression grew distant. "Had a sister once, Sarah. She was smart as a whip, always asking questions, wanting to know how things worked. My pa beat it out of her, said women should not be so forward. She married young to get away from him, and her husband was worse. She died giving birth at 16. His jaw clenched. Maybe if she had been taught to think for herself, to believe she had other choices, things would have been different. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. "I am so sorry. It was a long time ago." He turned back to her. "But I meant what I said. You want to teach girls to think? Do it here. I will make sure nobody stops you." Rebecca wanted to accept immediately, but caution held her back. "Mr. Wolfe, I appreciate your offer more than I can say. But I do not know you, and you do not know me. Perhaps I could stay for a few days, help around your home in exchange for the hospitality, and we could see if this arrangement might truly work." Preston nodded slowly. "That is fair. I have got a spare room in the cabin. It is not fancy, but it is clean and dry." The cabin's interior surprised her. She had expected rough bachelor quarters, but while simple, everything was well made and orderly. The main room held a sturdy table and chairs, a stone fireplace with a cooking pot hanging over the fire, and shelves lined with books. Books. Rebecca moved toward them, as if pulled by a magnet. "You read?" she asked, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. My ma taught me before she passed. Reading and writing both. He looked almost defensive. Just because I live in the mountains does not mean I am ignorant. I did not mean to imply that, Rebecca said quickly. I am just pleased. So many people out here have no use for books. Books are about the only company I have got most of the time. He showed her to a small room off the main living area. It held a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a chest of drawers, and a small window overlooking the stream. It was simple but comfortable, and Rebecca felt something in her chest loosen. For the first time since fleeing Muskogee, she felt safe. Over the next few days, Rebecca and Preston fell into an easy routine. She woke early to help with breakfast, though she quickly discovered her cooking skills were woefully inadequate. Preston was patient as he showed her how to make proper cornbread and not burn the bacon. You really did not do much cooking back east, he asked, amusement touching his eyes as she attempted to flip pancakes and sent one sailing onto the floor. We had a cook, Rebecca admitted, feeling her cheeks heat. My father believed in educating me, but practical skills were apparently not part of that education. Well, you are getting a practical education now. In return, Rebecca helped him with paperwork and accounts. Preston had a small but profitable operation selling horses to the army and trading furs, but his record-keeping was chaotic. She organized his ledgers, wrote letters to buyers, and helped him calculate fair prices. They talked as they worked. Rebecca learned that Preston was 30 years old, had come west after his sister's death to escape his father's tyranny, and had spent years trapping and hunting before buying this land. He was self-sufficient and solitary by nature, but not unkind. Preston learned about Rebecca's upbringing in Boston, her determination to attend college despite her father's reservations, her passion for teaching. She told him about the girls in Muskogee, about Margaret's defiant face and Sarah's tears. You miss them, Preston observed one evening as they sat by the fire. Every day, Rebecca admitted. I know I only had them for 6 months, but I felt like I was making a difference, like I was giving them tools they would carry forever. You were. You did. She looked at him, surprised by the certainty in his voice. And that girl Margaret will remember you her whole life, Preston continued. She will make different choices because of what you taught her. Maybe she will teach her own daughters the same things. That matters. Rebecca felt warmth spread through her chest. Thank you for saying that. Just the truth. On the 5th day, Preston took her on a tour of his property. They rode out on horseback, Rebecca on Pearl and Preston on his big bay stallion named Thor. He showed her the boundaries of his land, the best fishing spots in the stream, the places where deer came to drink at dawn. Over here, he said, leading her to a flat area near the stream but sheltered by trees. Would be a good spot for a schoolhouse. Close enough to the cabin for safety, but far enough for privacy. Water nearby, and the trees would provide shade in summer. Rebecca dismounted and walked the space, her mind already designing the building. It would work perfectly. How many students do you think might come? Got some families within 10 miles or so. Homesteaders, trappers. Not all have children, but some do. Plus, Muskogee is not that far as the crow flies. I would wager once word spreads that you are teaching, some folks might send their daughters this way. Would the families here accept me? A woman teaching girls to think? Preston's expression hardened. They would not have a choice. This is my land, my rules. Anyone who does not like it can stay away. Rebecca looked at this massive, fierce man who had offered her sanctuary without asking for anything in return, and felt something shift in her heart. He was not refined or educated in the formal sense. His hands were calloused, his clothes rough, his manners blunt, but he had more integrity than all the well-dressed men in Muskogee combined. "Why are you really doing this, Preston?" she asked softly. He dismounted and stood facing her, his eyes serious. "Told you about my sister. That is part of it. But truth is, I have been alone out here for 3 years. Thought that was what I wanted, to never depend on anyone or have anyone depend on me. But watching you these past few days, seeing you get excited about organizing my ledgers or learning to make biscuits, hearing you talk about teaching those girls." He paused, struggling for words. "Makes me realize maybe being alone is not the same as being content." Rebecca's breath caught. "Preston, not asking for anything," he said quickly. "You want to just be my neighbor, teach your students, that is fine. I just wanted you to know that having you here, it has been good. Real good." Before Rebecca could respond, they heard the sound of approaching horses. Preston's entire demeanor changed instantly, his hand moving to the rifle he carried on his saddle. "Get behind me," he said quietly. 4 men rode into the clearing, and Rebecca's heart sank as she recognized Mayor Hutchins and 3 other men from Muskogee. They reined in their horses, their faces hostile. "Miss Winters," Mayor Hutchins said, his voice dripping false politeness. "We heard you were staying out this way. Come to convince you that returning to Muskogee might be in your best interest." "I have no interest in returning," Rebecca said, stepping out from behind Preston despite his warning look. "See, that is a problem," one of the other men said. He was a rancher named Dalton, and Rebecca remembered he had been particularly vocal about running her out of town. "You stir up our women, put ideas in their heads, then run off before dealing with the consequences. My wife has been talking about starting some kind of women's reading circle. Got that notion from you. Heaven forbid women should read and discuss books," Rebecca said coldly. Preston moved subtly, positioning himself more fully between Rebecca and the men. "You are on my property uninvited. State your business or leave." Hutchins focused on Preston for the first time. "This does not concern you, mountain man. This is between us and Miss Winters. She is staying on my land. That makes it my concern." Preston's voice was calm but carried an edge of steel. "You cannot protect her forever," Dalton warned. "She is a troublemaker. Will poison any community she's part of. Then I guess it is good this is not your community." Preston's hand rested casually on his rifle. "Now, I have asked you polite to leave my property. Will not ask again." The 4 men exchanged glances. They were armed, but Preston's reputation had apparently preceded him. Rebecca could see the calculation in their eyes, weighing their anger against the risk. "You are making a mistake," Hutchins said finally. "Harboring her will bring you nothing but trouble. I will take my chances. Now get." The men turned their horses and rode off, but not before Dalton called back. "Do not think this is over." Preston watched until they disappeared from view, his body tense. Then he turned to Rebecca. "They might come back with more men." "I should leave," Rebecca said, hating the words even as she spoke them. "I do not want to bring violence to your home." "You are not going anywhere." Preston's voice was firm. "I meant what I said. You have sanctuary here. I will handle Hutchins and his friends if they return." "Preston, there were 4 of them. If they come back with more, then I will handle that too." He looked at her intently. "Rebecca, I do not run from bullies. Spent too many years watching my father terrorize my mother and sister. I am done standing by while small men try to control women they are afraid of. Rebecca felt something crack open in her chest. You could get hurt. I could. But some things are worth fighting for. His eyes held hers. You are worth fighting for. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Rebecca had spent her entire adult life fighting for her independence, refusing to rely on any man. But this felt different. Preston was not trying to control or own her. He was offering partnership, protection freely given without strings attached. I am staying, she said firmly, but I will not hide while you face potential danger. We do this together. A slight smile touched Preston's lips. Together. I like the sound of that. They rode back to the cabin in thoughtful silence. That evening, Rebecca helped Preston check his weapons and ammunition. She was surprised to find he had quite an arsenal. Not just rifles, but pistols and even a shotgun. Expecting a war? She asked, attempting levity. Out here, you prepare for anything. Bears, wolves, hostile strangers. Only way to survive is to be ready. He handed her a small pistol. You said you had one. You know how to actually use it? My father gave me basic instruction, Rebecca admitted. Show me. They spent the next hour in the clearing as dusk fell, with Preston teaching her proper aim and shooting technique. His instructions were patient and clear, and Rebecca found herself appreciating both his knowledge and the way he treated her as a capable student rather than a helpless woman. You are a good shot, Preston said after she hit 3 targets in a row. Just needed confidence. Having a good teacher helps, Rebecca replied, meeting his eyes. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition of growing connection. Preston looked away first, clearing his throat. We should get inside. Getting dark. That night, Rebecca lay in her small room, unable to sleep. She kept thinking about Preston's words, about his offer of land for a schoolhouse, about the way he had positioned himself between her and danger without hesitation. She thought about his gentle hands caring for Pearl, his patience teaching her to cook, his surprise and pleasure when she organized his books. She was falling for him. The realization should have terrified her. Rebecca had always imagined if she ever fell in love, it would be with someone from her own world. A professor, perhaps, or a lawyer. Someone educated and refined who moved in society and appreciated theater and art. Preston was none of those things. But he was real in a way those men had never been. He lived by a code of honor that required no social pressure to maintain. He valued her mind and her independence rather than fearing them. And when he looked at her with those blue-gray eyes, she felt seen in a way she never had before. The next week passed quietly. No one from Muskogee returned, and Rebecca began to hope they had decided the trouble was not worth it. She and Preston fell into deeper companionship, talking late into the evenings about everything from philosophy to practical matters of frontier survival. Preston began teaching her to ride better, to track animals, to read weather signs in the sky. Rebecca helped him draft letters, taught him some mathematics he had never learned, and shared books with him, delighting in his thoughtful observations about what they read. One evening, as they sat by the fire reading, Rebecca looked up to find Preston watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. The firelight played across his rugged features, softening them, highlighting the strength in his jaw and the surprising kindness in his eyes. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. Preston hesitated, then set his book aside. "Thinking that I have been alone for a long time. Thought I preferred it that way. But having you here, Rebecca, makes me realize I was not living before." just existing. Rebecca set her own book down, her heart racing. I feel the same. This past week, I have felt more myself than ever. Even teaching in Muskogee, I was always fighting, always defending my right to exist as I am. Here, with you, I can just be. You can always just be. That is not something you should have to fight for. Preston shifted, looking uncertain in a way she had never seen from this confident man. Rebecca, I know I am not what you are used to. I am rough, do not have fine manners, live in a cabin in the mountains, but I care about you, more than I have ever cared about anyone. Rebecca felt tears sting her eyes. Preston, you are everything I never knew I wanted. You are strong and kind and honorable. You respect my mind and my independence. You make me feel safe without making me feel weak. I care about you too. So much it frightens me. Frightens you why? Because I never wanted to need anyone. I fought so hard to be independent, to prove I could survive on my own. Caring about you feels like giving up that independence. Preston reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his much larger one. His palm was calloused and warm, and Rebecca felt the touch all the way to her core. Independence is not the same as being alone, Preston said quietly. Two people choosing to be together, supporting each other while still being themselves, that is partnership. That is not weakness. That is strength doubled. Rebecca looked at their joined hands, his so large and scarred, hers small and soft by comparison. They were complete opposites in so many ways. Yet somehow, they fit. I am falling in love with you, she whispered. Preston's hand tightened on hers. I already fell. Was just waiting to see if you might catch up. She laughed, a sound somewhere between a sob and joy. Then Preston was pulling her gently toward him, his other hand coming up to cup her face with surprising tenderness. He paused, his lips inches from hers, giving her one last chance to retreat. Rebecca closed the distance and kissed him. It was unlike any kiss she had ever experienced, not that there had been many. Preston kissed her like she was precious and powerful all at once, with passion tempered by reverence. His hand was gentle on her face, but she could feel the strength leashed behind his touch. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against hers. I will build you that schoolhouse, he said. We'll help you teach anyone who wants to learn. We'll stand between you and anyone who tries to stop you, if you will have me. I will have you, Rebecca said, laughing and crying at once. I will have you exactly as you are. They talked late into the night, making plans and sharing dreams. Preston told her about his vision for the land, about possibly raising horses more seriously, about building a life of purpose rather than just survival. Rebecca told him about her hopes for the school, about curriculum and teaching methods, about her dream of proving that educated women could thrive anywhere, even in the wild frontier. We will do it together, Preston said. Your dream and mine. Build something that matters. Together, Rebecca agreed, and sealed it with another kiss. The next morning, Preston began gathering materials for the schoolhouse. He rode to the nearest town, a 3-day round trip, to purchase proper lumber, nails, and other supplies. While he was gone, Rebecca explored the land more thoroughly, planning not just the school but a future. When Preston returned, he brought news. Word is spreading about a teacher living out in the mountains. Had 3 different families ask me about sending their daughters to study with you. Rebecca's eyes went wide. Really? When you told them I taught girls to think critically, they still wanted to send them. These are frontier families, Rebecca. They value practical thinking. Wives out here have to make decisions, manage homesteads, sometimes defend them. Having a woman who can think for herself is not a luxury, it is a necessity. He grinned. Plus, I might have mentioned you also teach reading, writing, and arithmetic. And that seems to appeal. They spent the next 3 weeks building the schoolhouse together. Preston did the heavy work, and Rebecca marveled at his strength as he lifted logs that would have required 2 normal men. But she helped where she could, holding boards steady, measuring, and planning the interior layout. Other neighbors began appearing, offering help. Rebecca met the Hendersons. Not related to the Hendersons in Muskogee, a homesteading family with 2 daughters aged 9 and 12. She met old Thomas, a former slave who had claimed land after the war and trapped for a living, who asked if she might also teach his grandchildren to read and write. She met the Morenos, a Mexican family who ran a small ranch and wanted their daughter to learn English properly. The community in these mountains was nothing like Muskogee. These people were too busy surviving to worry about whether women should be educated. They cared about practical things, useful things, and saw education as a tool rather than a threat. By mid-November, the schoolhouse was complete. It was simple but sturdy, with a wood stove for heat, wooden desks Preston had built himself, and shelves for Rebecca's precious books. She stood in the center of it, turning slowly, unable to believe this was real. "Well, thank you," she told Preston, who leaned against the doorframe watching her with undisguised affection. "Thank you for giving me this. You gave yourself this. I just provided the land and lumber." He pushed off the doorframe and came to her. "You are the one with the courage to teach, to stand up for what you believe even when people try to tear you down. I'm only standing because you gave me a place to stand," Rebecca said. "Preston, when I fled Muskogee, I thought my life was over. Thought I would be running forever, hiding, never able to do what I loved. You gave me back my purpose. You gave me back myself. You never lost yourself. You just needed people worthy of you." He pulled her close. "I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you, Rebecca Winters." "Rebecca Wolfe," she said softly, then caught her breath at her own boldness. "That is, if you were asking." Preston's eyes went wide, then blazed with emotion. "I was working up to asking proper. Had a whole speech planned and everything. Tell me you do not want pretty speeches. We are too honest with each other for that. I love you, Preston Wolfe. I want to marry you, build a life with you, teach and learn and grow old with you. Is that what you want? More than anything." His voice was rough with feeling. "I love you, Rebecca. You are the bravest, smartest, most amazing woman I have ever known. Marry me. Let me spend forever making sure you can always be exactly who you are." She kissed him, pouring everything she felt into it. When they broke apart, both were grinning like fools. "We need a preacher," Rebecca said practically. "Old Thomas used to preach. He could marry us." "Then let us ask him. I do not want to wait, Preston. I have wasted enough of my life on other people's opinions and expectations. I want to start our life together now." They were married 3 days later in the schoolhouse, with their small community of neighbors gathered as witnesses. Rebecca wore her best dress, simple dark blue wool, and Preston wore clean buckskins and had trimmed his beard. Old Thomas performed a simple but heartfelt ceremony, and when Preston kissed his bride, their friends and neighbors cheered. The Hendersons brought venison. The Morenos brought tamales. Another neighbor brought a jug of whiskey that was passed around while people congratulated the newlyweds. It was nothing like the society weddings Rebecca had attended in Boston, but it was perfect. These people had accepted her without question, had embraced her school, and now welcomed her as one of their own. That night, Preston carried Rebecca over the threshold of the cabin, now their cabin, and they began their married life with tenderness and passion. Rebecca discovered that Preston's gentleness extended to all things, and she marveled at how this powerful man could be so careful with her, so attuned to her needs and responses. Afterwards, lying in his arms, Rebecca felt complete in a way she never had before. "I never imagined this," she admitted. "Never imagined feeling so happy, so satisfied with my life." "Satisfied might be overselling it," Preston teased. "You have not even started teaching yet. Wait until you have 12 girls all asking questions at once and tracking mud everywhere." She laughed. "I cannot wait. When I think about what those girls will learn, what they might become. Preston, we are going to change lives. You already changed mine." He kissed the top of her head. "Figure changing a few more is just showing off." The school opened in December, despite the cold. 8 students showed up that first day, ranging from age 7 to 15. Rebecca taught them all together, dividing lessons by ability rather than age. She taught reading and writing, mathematics and history, science and critical thinking. She taught them to question, to analyze, to form their own opinions. And unlike in Muskogee, the parents were grateful. They saw their daughters grow more confident, more capable. The girls learned to calculate measurements for building and sewing, to read contracts and deeds, to write letters and keep accounts. They learned about government and history, about the world beyond the Oklahoma mountains. Preston was a constant supportive presence. He helped maintain the school, kept the wood stove supplied with fuel, and sometimes sat in on lessons himself, unashamed to learn alongside the girls. Rebecca loved him more every day. Loved his humility and his strength, his fierce protection and his gentle encouragement. Winter deepened, and life found its rhythm. Rebecca taught during the day, while Preston worked with his horses or checked his trap lines. In the evenings, they cooked together, read together, talked and laughed and loved. It was a simple life by Boston standards. But Rebecca had never been happier. In February, they had their first real test. Rebecca was teaching a lesson on women's suffrage, discussing the recent activities of Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, when 2 men rode up to the schoolhouse. Rebecca recognized one of them as Dalton from Muskogee. She stepped outside to meet them, her hand in her pocket where she now habitually carried the pistol Preston had taught her to shoot. "Gentlemen, can I help you?" "Heard you were still teaching your poison," Dalton said. "Came to see for ourselves." "I teach history, mathematics, and literacy," Rebecca said evenly. "If you consider those poison, that says more about you than me." The second man, someone Rebecca did not recognize, sneered at her. "You teach girls to be unnatural, to reject their God-given roles. I teach them to think. What they do with that education is their choice." Rebecca stood her ground, though her heart was racing. "Maybe we need to teach you a lesson about choices," Dalton said, dismounting. "You will not lay a hand on my wife." Preston's voice cut through the cold air like a blade. He emerged from the tree line where he had been working nearby. He carried an axe, and while he held it loosely, the implicit threat was clear. His face was hard, every inch the dangerous mountain man. "Your wife?" Dalton looked between them. "You married this woman?" "I did. She is under my protection, as are her students and this school. You You have got about 10 seconds to get back on your horse and ride out, or I will give you a lesson about choices you will not forget." The second man reached for his gun, but Preston moved with shocking speed. Before the man could draw, Preston had crossed the distance and had the axe handle pressed against his throat, using his superior strength to force the man back against his horse. "Do not," Preston said softly, dangerously. "You will not win this fight." Dalton's face purpled with rage, but he was not stupid. Preston had at least 4 inches and 50 pounds on either of them, and they were on his land. "This is not over." "It is, though. See, you keep thinking you can intimidate my wife into silence. But that is not how this works. She has every right to teach what she wants on our property. You do not get a say. Now, I will not tell you again. Leave." Preston released the second man, who gasped and rubbed his throat. The 2 men remounted and rode off, but their hostile looks promised this was not the last confrontation. Rebecca was shaking by the time they left. Preston immediately pulled her into his arms. "You all right?" "Yes. No. I do not know." She pressed her face against his chest. "I hate that my teaching brings this to you, brings violence and threats. They bring it to themselves by being small-minded fools. You are doing nothing wrong, Rebecca. Nothing." He tilted her face up. "I meant what I said. I will protect you and this school. They want to keep coming back for more lessons. I am happy to provide them." Inside the schoolhouse, 8 young faces watched anxiously. Rebecca took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and went back to her students. "Now, where were we? Ah, yes. Susan B. Anthony's arrest for voting in the 1872 election. Who can tell me why her trial was significant?" The girls gradually relaxed as Rebecca guided them back into the lesson. But Rebecca saw the new understanding in their eyes. They had witnessed her being threatened for teaching them, had seen her and Preston stand firm. It was a lesson in itself about courage and conviction. That evening, Preston and Rebecca talked seriously about the risks. "Maybe we need to be more careful," Rebecca said. "Not teach such controversial subjects." "No." Preston's voice was firm. "You start censoring yourself, they win. You teach what you believe needs teaching. We will deal with whatever comes. But if they come back with more men, then I will ask our neighbors for help. Old Thomas was a Buffalo soldier, served in the cavalry for 10 years. Henderson was a sharpshooter during the war. We are not as defenseless as Dalton thinks." Rebecca looked at this man she had married, this fierce protector who believed in her cause as passionately as she did. "How did I get so lucky?" "Lucky is me getting a wife who is beautiful, smart, brave, and patient enough to teach me mathematics." He pulled her into his lap. "Now stop worrying. We are building something important here, worth fighting for." Spring came, bringing warmer weather and new growth. Rebecca's student numbers grew to 12, and she found herself teaching a wide range of ages and abilities. Some of the girls were hungry for knowledge, soaking up everything she taught. Others struggled but persevered. All of them grew in confidence and capability. Preston built additions to the barn and expanded his horse operation. He had a gift for training difficult animals, and word spread about the quality of his horses. Military buyers and ranchers traveled to his property, bringing income and also respect. Preston Wolfe became known throughout the territory as a man of integrity and skill. The Wolfes also became known for their school. Rebecca began receiving letters from families asking about enrollment, some from as far as 50 miles away. She even received a tentative letter from Margaret Preston in Muskogee, now 17, asking if she might come to study and perhaps even assist with teaching. Rebecca wrote back immediately, welcoming Margaret with open arms. When the girl arrived in May, Rebecca barely recognized her. Margaret had grown into a poised young woman, and her eyes held determination Rebecca remembered well. "Thank you for letting me come," Margaret said, embracing Rebecca tightly. "Things have been difficult in Muskogee since you left. My father forbids me from reading anything except the Bible. But I turn 18 next month, and then I can make my own choices. You are welcome here as long as you need," Rebecca assured her. "And if you truly want to help teach, I could use an assistant." Margaret's face lit up. "Really? You would trust me? You were one of my best students, and you have passion for learning. That is what matters." Margaret fit into their household seamlessly. She was helpful and hardworking, assisting with teaching younger students while continuing her own education. She also brought news from Muskogee that both pleased and troubled Rebecca. "After you left, several of the women started talking more openly about wanting education and opportunities," Margaret explained one evening as they all sat around the dinner table. Mrs. Henderson, Sarah's mother, actually started teaching herself to read using books Sarah brought home. She is teaching other women now, secretly. They call it their reading circle, but it is really more. "Good for them," Preston said. "Takes courage to stand up to men like Hutchins and Dalton." "There is more," Margaret said carefully. "Some of the men are furious about it. There has been talk of finding you, making an example to show the other women what happens when they get above themselves." Rebecca felt ice in her stomach. "How serious is the talk?" "Serious enough that I thought you should know. Dalton has been drinking and raging about you corrupting the whole territory. He has about 10 men who agree with him." Preston's expression hardened. "Then I need to prepare. Rebecca, I want you to close the school for a while." "No." Rebecca's voice was firm. "I will not hide. We built this place for a reason. And I am trying to keep you alive," Preston said sharply. "If Dalton comes with 10 men, we could be in real danger. Then we get help, like you said. But I will not stop teaching because ignorant men make threats. If I do that, everything we have built means nothing." They argued back and forth, until finally Margaret spoke up. "Maybe there is another way. What if we spread word about the threat? Let people know what Dalton is planning, make it public so he cannot act in secret." Preston considered this. That might work. Hard to attack someone when everyone knows you are planning it. Makes you the villain instead of the victim. Over the next week, Preston and Rebecca rode to every homestead within 20 miles, quietly spreading word about the potential threat. The response surprised even Rebecca. Their neighbors rallied immediately, promising to watch out for strangers and to come running if trouble appeared. "You have given our daughters education," Mrs. Henderson said fiercely. "Given them a future beyond just being wives and mothers. Though there is nothing wrong with that either. We will not let small men destroy what you have built." Old Thomas was even more direct. "I spent the first 40 years of my life as another man's property. Fought in the war to free my people. I will be damned if I let some fool tell women they cannot be educated. You need help, Rebecca, you call? I will come with my rifle and my grandchildren, and we will all defend that school together." Rebecca was moved to tears by the outpouring of support. This community, these hard frontier people, had embraced her and her mission completely. They understood that educating women made families stronger, communities stronger. Sure enough, 3 weeks later, Dalton appeared with 7 men. But instead of finding the Wolfe homestead vulnerable, they found it surrounded by armed neighbors. Preston stood in front of the schoolhouse with Rebecca beside him and at least 20 people arrayed behind them. "This is private property," Preston called out. "You are trespassing." Dalton looked at the gathered crowd, his face purpling. "You cannot protect her forever, Wolfe." "Do not need to protect her forever. Just from you. And seems like I got plenty of help with that." Preston's hand rested on his rifle. "Now you have got a choice, Dalton. You can ride out peacefully and never come back, or we can settle this right here. But let me be real clear. You start shooting, you will not leave this clearing alive. There are too many of us, and we are defending our homes and our children's teacher." One of Dalton's men spoke up nervously. "Maybe we should go. This is not what you said it would be." "Shut up," Dalton snarled. But the fight was leaving his eyes. He had expected an easy target, not an armed community ready to defend itself. "Last chance," Preston said. "Ride out or face consequences." Dalton stared at Rebecca with pure hatred. "You have turned these people against God's natural order." "I have taught children to read and write," Rebecca said clearly. "If you find that threatening, that is your weakness, not my crime." Dalton spat on the ground, then wheeled his horse around. "Come on," he growled at his men. They rode off, leaving the gathered neighbors cheering their departure. But Rebecca knew something had shifted. Dalton had been publicly humiliated, and men like him rarely forgot such things. She leaned against Preston, suddenly exhausted. "It is not over," she said quietly. "Maybe not, but today we won." Preston kissed her forehead. "And we will keep winning, one day at a time." The community celebrated their victory with a gathering at the Wolfe homestead. People brought food and drink, and there was music and dancing late into the night. Rebecca watched Preston laugh with old Thomas, while Margaret danced with Henderson's oldest boy, and felt a swell of love and belonging so strong it nearly overwhelmed her. This was her home. These were her people, not the society folks of Boston who would have looked down on her frontier life, but real people who valued education and courage and community. Summer passed peacefully. Rebecca's school thrived, and she expanded her curriculum to include practical sciences like botany and basic medicine, which frontier women desperately needed. Margaret proved to be an excellent assistant teacher, and Rebecca began training her to eventually take over some classes. In August, Rebecca realized she had missed her monthly courses twice. She had been so busy with teaching that she had not noticed at first. But when the realization hit, she was filled with a mixture of joy and terror. She told Preston that evening as they sat by the stream watching the sunset, "I think I am pregnant." Preston went very still, then turned to her with wonder in his eyes. "Are you sure?" "Not completely, but fairly certain. I have all the signs my mother told me to watch for." Preston pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was made of glass. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Rebecca asked, needing to hear it. Happy does not begin to cover it. Preston's voice was thick with emotion. Terrified, amazed, grateful, all at once. "Rebecca, you have given me everything. A home, a purpose, a future, and now a child. I do not have words for what I feel." They held each other as the sun set, talking quietly about the future. Preston immediately began making plans to expand the cabin, to add another room for the baby. Rebecca worried about continuing to teach while pregnant, but Preston assured her they would figure it out together. "Margaret can handle more of the teaching," he said, "and the other mothers will help. You are not alone in this." He was right. When Rebecca announced her pregnancy to her students and their families, The response was overwhelming support. The women organized themselves to ensure Rebecca did not overwork herself. They brought food, helped with cleaning, and took turns assisting at the school. Margaret stepped up beautifully, taking over more lessons and proving herself a natural teacher. "You gave me this," she told Rebecca one evening. "Showed me I could be more than what Muskogee wanted me to be. Now I want to give that to other girls." Rebecca's pregnancy progressed smoothly through fall and into winter. Her belly grew round, and Preston was ridiculously protective, constantly fussing over her. Rebecca found it both endearing and exasperating. "I am pregnant, not fragile," she told him when he tried to carry her up the cabin steps for the 10th time. "I know. But you are carrying my child. Let me take care of you." The baby was born in March 1875, on a snowy day when the mountains were draped in white. The birth was attended by 3 of the neighboring women who had experience with such things. Preston paced outside the cabin, wild-eyed with worry, until old Thomas finally made him sit down and drink whiskey to calm his nerves. When Rebecca's cries finally gave way to a baby's wail, Preston burst into the cabin to find his wife exhausted but triumphant, cradling a tiny bundle. "A boy," Rebecca said, her voice tired but filled with joy. "We have a son, Preston." Preston knelt beside the bed, his large hands trembling as he touched the baby's tiny head. "He is perfect. You are perfect." He looked at Rebecca with tears streaming down his face. "Thank you. Thank you for this gift." They named him Samuel, after Preston's mother, Sarah's middle name. Samuel Wolfe was a healthy, loud baby who filled the cabin with his presence. Preston was completely besotted, spending hours just watching his son sleep or holding him while Rebecca rested. Rebecca took 2 months away from teaching to recover and bond with Samuel. Margaret ran the school during that time, proving herself more than capable. When Rebecca did return to teaching, she often brought Samuel with her, and her students delighted in the baby. Life settled into a new rhythm. Rebecca taught while managing a household and infant. Preston expanded his horse business and took over more of the cooking and household chores to give Rebecca time for Samuel and her students. Margaret became an indispensable part of their lives, like a younger sister to Rebecca and an aunt to Samuel. Years passed, peaceful and productive. Samuel grew into a bright, curious toddler who loved books and horses equally. The school expanded to nearly 20 students, necessitating a larger building that Preston and the neighbors built together. Rebecca's reputation spread throughout the territory as the teacher who had stood up to those who would silence her. When Samuel was 3, Rebecca gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Preston's sister. Preston wept when Rebecca told him the name she had chosen, understanding it was both honor and healing. Sarah was quieter than Samuel, but equally bright. With her father's blue-gray eyes and her mother's determination, Margaret eventually met and married Henderson's oldest son, a kind young man who respected her education and intelligence. They built a homestead nearby, and Margaret continued teaching, now running a second school that handled younger children, while Rebecca focused on older students and advanced subjects. In 1880, Preston and Rebecca celebrated their 7th anniversary, surrounded by friends, neighbors, and students. Their home had become a gathering place for the community, a place where ideas were exchanged and learning was valued. Rebecca looked around at the gathered faces, at her children playing with their friends, at her husband laughing with neighbors, at Margaret teaching a group of girls a complicated mathematics problem, and felt overwhelming gratitude. She thought about the terrified woman who had fled Muskogee 7 years ago, who had been so close to giving up her dreams. That night, after everyone had left and the children were asleep, Rebecca and Preston stood on their porch looking at the mountains, silver in moonlight. Do you ever regret it? Preston asked, his arm around her waist. Giving up a comfortable life in Boston for this hard frontier existence? Rebecca laughed. Not for a single moment. This life, this place, you and our children and our purpose here, it is everything I never knew to dream of. I thought I wanted independence and career. Turns out what I really wanted was a partner who believed in me and a community worth serving. I am the one who got lucky, Preston said. A brave, brilliant woman rode onto my property 7 years ago and changed my entire life. Turned my wilderness survival into a home, my solitude into family, my existence into meaning. We did that together. Rebecca turned in his arms. Everything we built as partners. Preston kissed her, tender and deep. Here is to the next 7 years, and the 7 after that, and every 7 beyond. I will love you and support your work until I draw my last breath. Rebecca Wolfe. And I will love you and build this life with you for all my days, Preston Wolfe. They stood together in the moonlight. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from nothing but courage, love, and determination. The schoolhouse stood solid in the clearing, a testament to Rebecca's refusal to be silenced. The cabin glowed warm with lamplight, sheltering their sleeping children and the life they had created. Years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and triumphs. Samuel and Sarah grew, joined eventually by another son they named Thomas after their dear friend. The school expanded again, now teaching nearly 40 students from across the territory. Rebecca's former students began returning as adults to tell her about their lives, about how her teaching had opened doors and given them choices. One former student became a doctor, one of the first women admitted to medical school in the territory. Another became a lawyer. Several became teachers themselves, spreading Rebecca's philosophy of education and critical thinking across Oklahoma. Rebecca watched with pride as these young women achieved things she had only dreamed of as possibilities. Preston's horse business thrived, and he became known as one of the most skilled trainers in the territory. But he always made time for Rebecca's school, teaching practical skills like tracking and survival, showing the students that education included knowledge passed down through experience as well as books. Margaret and her husband had 4 children who all attended their mother's school, then moved on to Rebecca's for advanced studies. The 2 schools became institutions in the region, with families moving to the area specifically for the educational opportunities. In 1885, 12 years after Rebecca fled Muskogee, she received an unexpected letter. It was from Sarah Henderson, the girl who had cried when the town ran Rebecca out. Sarah was now married with children of her own, and she wrote to tell Rebecca about the changes in Muskogee. The reading circle the women started after you left grew and grew, Sarah wrote. Eventually enough women were educated that they began demanding changes. We now have a female teacher at the school who teaches girls the same as boys. Mrs. Henderson, my mother, runs a library where women gather to discuss books and ideas. It is not as free as I imagine your school is, but it is progress. You started something, Miss Winters. Even though they drove you away, your influence remained and grew. I wanted you to know that your time here mattered. Rebecca read the letter to Preston that evening, tears streaming down her face. I did not think I had made any real difference there. Thought they erased everything I tried to build. You cannot erase ideas once they are planted, Preston said wisely. Those girls you taught carried what you gave them and passed it on. That is the power of education. It multiplies. Rebecca kept that letter in her desk and read it whenever she felt discouraged or wondered if her work truly mattered. It reminded her that even apparent defeat could sow seeds of future victory. Their children grew into fine young people. Samuel proved to have his father's skill with animals and his mother's love of learning, eventually planning to study veterinary medicine. Sarah was quieter but determined, with a gift for mathematics that astounded even Rebecca. She spoke of becoming an engineer, which made Preston swell with pride. Thomas, the baby, was still young, but showed signs of his namesake's wisdom and storytelling ability. The community around the Wolfe homestead grew and prospered. What had started as scattered homesteads became a proper settlement. Someone opened a general store, a doctor settled in the area, drawn by the educated population. A proper church was built, though the preacher was chosen carefully to ensure he supported education for all. Through it all, Preston and Rebecca's love deepened. They had built a true partnership, supporting each other's dreams while creating something bigger than either could have achieved alone. Preston never tried to control Rebecca or limit her influence. Rebecca never took Preston's strength and support for granted. They argued sometimes, as any couple did. Rebecca thought Preston was too protective. Preston thought Rebecca pushed herself too hard. But they always talked through their disagreements with respect and love, modeling for their children what a healthy partnership looked like. In 1890, Preston and Rebecca stood at the edge of their property watching workers break ground on a third school building. The original schoolhouse Rebecca had taught in was now used for community gatherings. Margaret's School for Young Children served nearly 60 students. This new building would house advanced studies for older students, including sciences and higher mathematics. "We need a name for it," Preston said. "Something that captures what it represents." Rebecca thought for a moment, then smiled. "The Sarah Wolfe School for Critical Thinking, in honor of your sister and what might have been possible for her." Preston pulled her close, his eyes suspiciously bright. She would have loved that. "Thank you." The school opened that fall with 30 students enrolled, including Samuel and Sarah Wolfe. Rebecca taught there alongside 3 other teachers, including one young man who specialized in sciences. The curriculum was advanced and rigorous, preparing students for university education if they desired it. Rebecca was 41 now, her dark hair threaded with silver. Preston was 47, his body still strong but bearing the marks of years of hard physical labor. They had built a life beyond anything either had imagined that day when Rebecca's horse threw a shoe and brought her to Preston's land. They often talked about that day, laughing about how unlikely their meeting had been, how easily it might never have happened. Preston liked to say that fate had a hand in it. Rebecca, ever the rational teacher, argued it was simply chance and fortunate circumstances. But both agreed that, however it had happened, they were grateful. Their anniversary had become a community celebration, with friends and neighbors gathering to honor not just their marriage, but everything they had built together. At their 17th anniversary party, old Thomas, now in his 70s but still sharp as ever, gave a speech that moved everyone to tears. 17 years ago, a brave woman and a good man decided to stand against small minds and prove that education and partnership could thrive even in this wild place, Thomas said. They built schools and raised children and created a community that values thinking over mindless obedience. They showed us all that courage and love can change the world. One student, one day, one decision at a time. We are all better for knowing them. Rebecca and Preston stood together, their children and their students surrounding them, and felt the weight of what they had accomplished. It was not just the schools or the education. It was the lives changed, the minds opened, the futures made possible. When everyone had left and they lay in bed that night, Preston pulled Rebecca close. "Any regrets?" "Not a single one." Rebecca said firmly. This life, hard as it has been sometimes, is exactly what I was meant for. And you, Preston Wolfe, are exactly who I was meant to find. You know I will love you until I take my last breath and beyond, if such things are possible. I know. And I will love you just as long. They fell asleep in each other's arms. Two people who had found each other in the wilderness and built a home, a family, a legacy. Years continued to unfold. Samuel went east to study veterinary medicine, returning 5 years later to set up practice serving the ranches and farms of Oklahoma. He married a young woman he met at university, a fellow student who had been inspired by his stories of his mother's school. They settled near the Wolfe homestead and had 3 children who naturally attended their grandmother's school. Sarah did indeed become an engineer, one of the first women in the field. She worked on bridge construction and water systems, bringing her skills back to Oklahoma to improve infrastructure. She married later to a fellow engineer who respected her brilliance. And they had 2 children. Thomas became a teacher like his mother, taking over the younger children's school when Margaret retired. He had his father's patience and his mother's passion for education, and he carried on the family legacy of making learning accessible to all. Preston and Rebecca grew old together, their hair silver, their faces lined with years of laughter and work and purpose. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, watching their legacy spread through multiple generations. The schools they had founded became institutions throughout Oklahoma Territory, and eventually the state of Oklahoma, when it achieved statehood in 1907. The Sarah Wolfe School for Critical Thinking gained fame as one of the finest educational institutions in the region, accepting both male and female students and focusing on developing independent thought. Rebecca continued teaching into her 60s, finally retiring only when her eyesight began to fail. Even then, she remained active in the schools, advising teachers and speaking to students about the importance of education and standing firm in one's convictions. Preston remained strong longer, still working with horses into his 70s. He was a fixture in the community, the mountain man who had given sanctuary to a teacher and built an empire of learning on his land. People came from across the state to meet him, to hear his story. One evening in 1915, Preston and Rebecca sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. They were in their 80s now, their bodies frail but their minds still sharp. The original cabin had been expanded and improved over the years, but they still lived in the home Preston had built with his own hands decades ago. "Do you remember the day we met?" Rebecca asked, her voice soft with age but still clear. "You rode up on Thor and I was so frightened. You looked so wild and dangerous." Preston chuckled. "I remember thinking you were the bravest woman I had ever seen. Standing there alone with a lame horse, trying not to show your fear. I knew right then you were special. I never imagined that frightening mountain man would become the love of my life. I never imagined I would have a life worth living until you came into it." Preston took her hand, his grip still strong despite his age. "Thank you, Rebecca, for everything, for trusting me, for building this with me, for giving me a purpose beyond simple survival. Thank you for giving me sanctuary, for believing in my work, for standing beside me against everyone who tried to stop us." Rebecca squeezed his hand. "We built something good here, Preston. Something that will outlast us." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set. 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a legacy of education, partnership, and love. The school stood solid in the distance, filled with students who would carry forward the values Preston and Rebecca had fought for. That night, Preston held Rebecca close as they slept, as he had every night for over 40 years. They had faced down angry mobs and built schools. They had raised children and helped shape generations. They had loved fiercely and lived boldly. Two souls who had found their perfect match in each other. Preston passed peacefully in his sleep in 1917, his hand clasped in Rebecca's. She held him and wept, grieving the man who had given her everything, who had protected her dreams and shared her vision. The community mourned with her, recognizing they had lost a giant, a man whose quiet strength and unwavering integrity had shaped them all. Rebecca lived 2 more years, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Former students visited constantly, telling her how her teaching had changed their lives. She spent her final days in the cabin she and Preston had shared, looking at the mountains he had loved, remembering their life together. She passed on a spring morning in 1919, a smile on her face, at peace knowing she had lived a life of purpose and love. She was buried beside Preston on a hill overlooking the schools they had built. Their graves marked with simple stones that read, Preston Wolfe, 1843-1917. He gave sanctuary to dreams. Rebecca. Wolfe, 1849-1919. She taught girls to think. But their true monument was not stone. It was the generations of educated women and men who carried forward their legacy. It was the schools that continued to thrive, teaching critical thinking and independence. It was the community they had helped build, where education was valued and women were respected as thinking individuals. The Sarah Wolfe School for Critical Thinking operated for over 100 years, eventually becoming absorbed into the Oklahoma public school system, but never losing its core mission. The original schoolhouse Preston built was preserved as a historical landmark, a testament to one woman's courage and one man's support. Their great-great-grandchildren still told the story of how a teacher fled persecution and found a mountain man who gave her land to teach on. How they fell in love and built schools and changed the culture of an entire region. How they proved that education and partnership could overcome any obstacle. The story of Preston and Rebecca Wolfe became legend in Oklahoma, taught in schools as an example of courage, love, and standing firm in one's convictions. It was a reminder that one person's actions could change the world, especially when supported by a partner who believed in their dreams. And though Preston and Rebecca had been gone for many years, their love story lived on. It was a love built on mutual respect and shared purpose, on fierce protection and gentle encouragement, on the understanding that true partnership meant supporting each other's dreams while building something greater together. They had started with nothing but courage and determination. They had faced down angry mobs and built anyway. They had loved deeply and lived boldly. And they had left behind a legacy that would inspire generations. The mountain man and the teacher who taught girls to think, who built schools in the wilderness, and who proved that love and education could transform the world. Their story was complete, their ending not tragic but triumphant. They had lived full lives, raised wonderful children, built institutions that outlasted them, and most importantly, they had loved each other until their final days. It was the happily ever after they had earned through courage, determination, and unwavering commitment to each other and their shared vision. The schools continued. The students graduated and went on to change the world. The community thrived, and the memory of Preston and Rebecca Wolfe, the mountain man and the teacher who had started it all, lived on as inspiration for everyone who believed that education, courage, and love could overcome any obstacle.